BCI Wisdom Podcast. Not sure how we're going to call that one, but we have Sami Jawhar with us. Good job, Charles. He's a neurotechnologist, serial entrepreneur, digital nomad, builder of things. He works at Kernel. So really caught my attention. Me and Sami have been discussing a bunch of interesting things in the past couple of minutes, ranging from philosophy to BCI, neural hacking, and everything in between. And we just took a bio break, uh, which I find out is taking a pee break. Never heard that before.
Well,
Sami
you
is kind of,
take
yeah,
care, you use the restroom, you get a snack, it's a bio break. You got to take care of your biological needs.
right. And that's a very Sami-ish thing to say. Sam and I were talking about, the what's in the popular culture and how to be an independent thinker. I kind of identify myself quite a lot with you, Sami. But in the last few years, like maybe I've kind of moderated my hermetic, like being a hermit behaviors. I've worked on my social skills a little bit, but yeah, you're kind of you're in your own bubble, which is a good thing, by the way. Me personally, I'm seeking a lot of startup co-founders, hyper nerds like you. You're really focused, and like me, I'm in multiple directions. Anyway, can you try to introduce yourself? Try to define yourself in like less than 30 seconds.
Sure. Yeah. So I'd say the easiest way to define, to get to know me is that my purpose in life is to improve the general mental wellness of people. I'm especially interested in meditation and neurotechnology. I work at Kernel as a data scientist, but just as a disclaimer, nothing I say reflects any of the opinions of anyone at Kernel. I am here as an independent person. Kernel does not representing Kernel in any way, but that's where my path has led me most recently, and so that gives you a good sense of, you know, things I'm interested in and
Right.
the type of technology that I work with.
Yeah, and that's really cool. Though, okay, and for those wondering, watching Sami walk, he's not walking on air, he's walking on a walking treadmill. Like
Walking
the
treadmill.
Yeah, the biohackers, seen Ben Greenfield do that. I've had another guy, I think, yesterday on a walking treadmill. And as a nomad, I'm like stabilizing my life. I'm buying a house and I will have one of these. You're not doing the nomadic thing right now because you have this walking treadmill, right? Like, how's your life right now?
Yeah. I was a nomad for 3 years. It's what I call my neuroscience Ronin period, where I traveled the world after helping co-found a cybersecurity company in the Netherlands. That's kind of what started the nomading. And then I just went around that didn't work out. Me and my co-founder had some we didn't work that well together. So that was but it was a good learning experience for me. Um, and then after that, I transitioned out and just started emailing random neuroscience labs and saying, "Hey, I can do things. Let me do things for you." And so I would travel around and hop from country to country and work remotely and do interesting work for different labs that would let me do things.
Love
And then
it.
I eventually got the gig at Kernel.
Nice. What did you learn from your nomad journey so far? And why are you gonna restart it and when?
Yeah. So right now I'm in Salt Lake City. I'm kind of stabilizing a home base here, both for myself and for my little sister, who I support. So I'm like trying to make a nice central home base here. And then, the summer is nice in Salt Lake. There's hiking, there's, so fun stuff to do. So I'll stick around here. I've been really appreciating being near family. And then once it gets uncomfortably cold, I will leave because that's one of the things I have lost all tolerance for is the ability to deal with uncomfortably cold weather. I'll just go somewhere warm. There's a lot of places in the world.
Right, but what about cold exposure? What about the brown fat that you get out of it, the resilience and the nice biochemicals?
Well, I mean, have nothing to say about that. I don't know the literature. I've heard about this. I take cold showers every day. Does that count?
Yes, yes, that counts
Okay,
for sure.
cool.
But your body kind of self-regulating. One of the problem nowadays is that everything is so comfortable, right?
Yeah.
And back in the days, it used to be all about suffering. Like me, that's why I put myself into shit situations multiple times a week. If it's raining, I'm gonna go out, um, and I'm gonna carry the goddamn groceries, and the heavier the better. Um,
Yeah,
just
no,
like a
absolutely. I'm
cavern man.
100% with you there. Like, my people, people who come to my house often say, like, I warn them, like, it's not a comfortable place. When it's hot, I just take off my shirt. Like, I'm not going to turn on the AC. I don't own a car. I walk to the grocery store. And exactly the same thing. Like, if I'm going to go for a run and it's raining, I'm still going to go for a run. Like, the rain, well, what happens if it's raining? I get wet, like So I agree. But there's also just there's so much of the world to explore, and
Right.
why, if I can move around and see so much of the world, then I'm gonna do that.
And you're this kid from Lebanon. Why are you so weird? Because me, I can put some dots on my eyes of like why I'm weird, why I'm this way. I was this popular kid in primary school, then went from popular to not so popular. That created trauma in me. I began being this World of Warcraft addict, became number one on my server. Um, Went through party and alcohol to cope with all of that, and discovered entrepreneurship, and then began traveling the world. And I've always been kind of a philosopher and intellectual type of kid, so that's why I'm weird. Why are you that way?
I think asking why questions often like that is sometimes just an invitation to tell stories that make ourselves feel good. I'm not sure I have a really good answer to why. A lot of I can say things about my childhood or whatnot that paint a nice narrative, but I don't know. Why am I like this way? Biology and the coincidence of life. Uh,
Love it.
that's all I can really say.
Right. But the why, I find that when we ask these questions, sometimes it's how we formulate the questions. 80% of the answer is in there.
Mm.
And just pointing out to some piece of data will bring some mental release. But yes, there's this Hollywood part to it, which is to entertain and rags to riches. And as we said, like marketing and educating is in part like first entertaining and then going with the information and pinpointing it. But no, I mean, yeah, that's a very rational way to view it. But you've
I
been
would
put on a
I
very
definitely
special
would
path.
say,
There must have been some stuff that made you that way. Still,
um, I definitely would say that being different is probably something like that's part of my identity now, and I take pride in my differences. And that probably comes, from childhood things, and trying to define yourself in terms of your uniqueness. And so now I don't think it's terribly uncommon for one to define, seek some kind of identity in being an outlier or in being a countercultural type person. So there's probably some of that, which in itself is not very unique, but whatever.
I find that us meditators, or folks part of the spiritual community, we also detach ourselves from ego, and we have not a good relationship with ego. Like if this ego thing was bad, me coming from various retreats, often I did value ego after that. I do think that egos is quite important. It's the testosterone in the estrogen. It's that you kind of need that to move yourself forward, and you nothing wrong with having like some kind of story and an identity. I do think that even yourself as a very rational guy, you're constantly telling yourself stories, like oh, walking on this treadmill will make me better, and accepting this podcast will help me. I mean, us humans, I think that's the way we reason, right? Stories. What do you think about
Mm.
that?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think that so I'm more and more often find myself aware of the stories that I'm telling myself, and one can try to fight against that. One can try to say like, oh no, I should be rational, and I should not only care, I shouldn't care about X or Y, but it's irrational to ignore the realities of human biology. And the realities of human biology are such that we have certain psychological tendencies. We are motivated by certain things and not by other things. And if you can use those as tools to structure your life in a way that it aligns with your values, then why would you not use those tools? Why
Right.
would you pretend like telling yourself a story does not motivate you, when instead you could tell yourself a great story that motivates you
Exactly.
towards your values? Like,
Yep.
if that's something you can do, why would you take that tool set away from you and pretend like the Spock kind of thing?
Yeah, and if you can experiment in your life, what values do you really embody and how to embody them with a scientific method of testing what works and what doesn't work, I think that's where you reach your goal. And then we're probably talking about happiness and generating that happiness biochemically in your brain. If you are happy, then you can reach your goals faster. And then another thing that popped in my head was like, oh, should we try to fight our existing mindset? Is there any value of becoming a monk? I don't think so. My one of my goal is to help the world, and it's not by meditating 20 hours a day that I will achieve these goals. And the final thing that popped is I'm very much bullish on BCI to modify biochemically my brain. I mean, mindset has paid quite a lot in my case, just adding these mental Lego blocks and oh, stoicism will help me in that situation and so forth. But what do you think about a time in which we will be able to modify the brain, force it to be some way to reach our goals quicker?
I hope to help usher in those days. I think meditation and philosophy are technologies that we have developed, to live a better life. But technology has progressed. We have more tools available to us now, and I think if we still value this goal of alleviating suffering, within humanity, I definitely think there's still a place for meditation. There's still a place for contemplation. There's still a place for living an intentional life. But there's also no reason to ignore the other tools that we have available to us. And whether that is like direct brain stimulation, or just, we're discovering now very ways to have very fine-tuned control over mood and things with stuff like light stimuli and sound stimuli. And like, yes, there are biological facts about the brain, and we're getting better and better at measuring and manipulating them. So why wouldn't we? I would love to have. It's essentially my purpose in life to help develop the next generation of meditation, where meditation again is the technology that we use to develop to cultivate that suffering alleviating mindfulness state.
Love
And
it.
that could include any kind of technology.
As you were mentioning, alleviating suffering, I've done crazy things like Ironmans and ultra events. You run on a daily basis. You're familiar with that. And I was covering that in a previous podcast, but I've got to love pain,
Mm,
literally love
mm.
pain. And then it came to my mind like, okay, like, do I need to alleviate suffering? Can't people adapt to that and get to almost love it? But then came like, oh, with the golden rule, what if I love pain and then I impose pain on others? And I'm like, yeah, you should be able to love pain. I don't think that'd be an ideal world. So, and
Well,
yeah,
it seems to me you've conflated suffering with pain. And pain is a sensation, and suffering is our experience of that
right.
sensation. And one of the things that, like, some of the most painful experiences I've ever have also been some of the ones where I have been able to decouple the pain from the suffering. Like, there was, I think it was my last meditation retreat or the one before that, where I just decided I'm not going to move for this entire 2 hours. I'm just not going to move. And by the end of it, I was in excruciating pain, but I could also watch. I was like, I could see moment by moment as
Oh
my
shit.
my brain decided this is bad. I don't like it. I don't like it. And then it just decided, nah, you know what? It's fine. The physical sensation did not change, but my
Whoa.
experience of the sensation, all of a sudden it was like, yeah, there is pain, and that's not something I need to do anything about. And
Dude,
then it
that's
came
monk
back.
level shit right there.
But then it came back, right? It's like, oh no, I don't like it. I don't like it. Oh no, actually, it's fine. So, pain and suffering are not the same thing, and neither
Hmm,
is, and pleasure also can be a source of suffering. So I think that's something we need to learn to decouple in our understanding of, human wellness, is
good
that
point.
you
I
you can
mean,
have pain but not suffer.
hmm. And what are examples in which pleasure can cause suffering? And give us also like examples of how you suffered or typical example of suffering purely to mental constructs.
Well, I think one that's really common. This is not, any unique insight of mine, is that the things that we enjoy, we start to crave, right? And that craving,
Oh
that
yeah.
like anticipated pleasure, that like, oh, I'm gonna like this so much. And then, but then that craving can kind of take over your thinking, and it can start to become anxiety inducing in and of itself. You're like, oh, I really don't want this pleasant thing to end. And that becomes suffering. That like, I want this to, I really want this, this cheesecake milkshake to last forever. And,
Right.
there's like
Or this
this.
party that like my 18 years old self, I let's finish the night at 3 a.m. and let's get very, very drunk, else it's not a good Saturday.
Yeah, yeah. So the attachment to pleasure itself creates suffering. And then and then once you start to recognize that in yourself, once you start to recognize that mental pattern of attachment to attachment to pleasure and attachment to these pleasant sensations, you want to change that in yourself. And then whenever you see yourself not having yet changed, that can also become a source of suffering, because you have not yet relinquished, this attachment. And so it's like, we are just humans as a species. We did not evolve to have a suffering free life. And there's just so many ways where our psychology gets in the way of us, gets in the way of our well-being, unfortunately.
But how did Mother Nature, or that force behind of it all, the laws of thermodynamics, how did we get there? How did we created an environment that we cannot adapt quick enough? Like, how did that happen?
Well, I think this is another one of those things where we're going to tell stories that make ourselves feel good. The reality is that evolution is not teleological, right? Evolution is not goal directed. It's just
It's
fitness
random. It's
landscape and mutations, and whatever happened to survive is the thing that is gonna, pass on. And the universe is under no obligation to respect our preference for a suffering-free life when it comes to the things that happen to fit the fitness landscape at the moment, and be the things that evolve. So
isn't there some
it's
intelligence between that evolution? For example, we see, I mean, that's still a theory. It's not provable in the lab, but COVID happened because we're just too much humans on this planet Earth. Um, and then there's mosquitoes that are thriving, there's ticks that are thriving under that environment. Isn't there an intelligence force that is always balancing it out in the end? Or is that a
uh
story?
I don't believe so. No, I mean, I'm not someone that believes in cosmic purposes and some grand guiding intelligence, or reasons. Like, I think often that asking questions why of the universe is just, it's an illusion of language. The language gives us the ability to construct sentences where we can ask things like, why did X happen? But the fact that this is a syntactically correct sentence doesn't mean that it actually means anything. This is just like, I think some of these questions are just logically incoherent. I don't think they and not only do they not have answers, the questions themselves don't even really make sense.
And we
Why did X
construct these
happen?
with our human brains. How can we introduce better question asking skills in our human brains? Is it the how question? Is it the what?
Well,
What makes for a good question, a scientific question that can lead to advancement?
hmm, I think that's a quite. I mean, this kind of goes back to what we were talking about before we started recording with, someone who has a deep training in philosophy would, I think, be better able to recognize these traps that people fall into of asking certain types of questions that aren't actually as well posed as they seem to be. I think there's probably, but also from a purely, from a purely practical point of view, I know there's an emerging field of progress studies, and like, what are the types of practices in science or otherwise that tend to lead to more fruitful innovation and stuff like that. Maybe those guys have something to say about what are the types of questions that tend to lead to more progress. I try to avoid these questions of why. Like, why did X happen? X happened because all of the previous things that happened, and the evolution of the Schrodinger, of the wave function of the universe under the Schrodinger equation.
But isn't that how you make science? Isn't that how you operate that kernel, like with data, and you ask the why and you dig deeper and then you finally get to gold?
Well, these are different types of questions. These are different types of. I'm not sure we're asking. Well, I suppose you can. I mean, language is a game where you could always restructure a question so that it's a why question. But again, there are certain domains where I think asking why it's not actually as meaningful as it seems to be, just because you put it in a nice English sentence.
Language has its limitation for sure. It's one way to get insights, and I'm pondering how, yeah, like, well, it leads to my next question. Do you think we could straight up inject information in there instead of naturally generating these neurons connecting together? Do you think that would be a better solution to ask better questions?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Can you explain what you mean by inject information?
Yeah, Neuralink style. Injecting information in the sense of generating new biological or artificial neurons,
I don't
pathways, connections.
I don't see any reason why, given a completed science of the brain and body, we couldn't have some kind of information transfer between people, or like, have some kind of the Matrix style. Now I know kung fu, download. I don't see any reason why that's impossible in principle, but for that to, and I could see how that could be useful for accelerating the rate of progress if you can, fast track the learning progress among people. But in terms of like generating genuinely new knowledge, if you're injecting information to someone's brain, and you're expecting that to generate something new, genuinely new, in the landscape of, human knowledge. I don't know, that I'm not sure how that helps really.
It would help tons. What if we can instantly educate people on some matters so that they don't fall into serotonin traps and unhappiness and suffering?
No, yeah, like I said, absolutely. I think it can accelerate that learning process, right? But if you're expecting, like, I inject you with X and now you will be able to generate something that no one before has ever thought. I don't know. It seems to me like that's kind of begging the question, because you'd have to already know the thing before you injected it into my brain.
If AGI would generate that piece and you inject it in someone else, but it begs the question, like, what is new information? Like you said, everything is constructed on layers. There's a knowledge graph, and everything comes from a past source of information. Because it, maybe your point is, or what I thought about at least, is that alien intelligence would have nothing to do with our current intelligence. Maybe we just understand nothing about it. And it wouldn't be need it wouldn't need to be connected with something that we already know. But if we do believe in universal science and physics principles, I do think that it would be somewhat related. This new piece of information, or
Yeah.
you would have to connect it to something artificially to make the brain believe with some kind of story that it makes sense.
Yeah, that I mean, so you said, if AGI came up with some new, like, developed new knowledge, which I also see no reason in principle why that wouldn't be possible. I totally believe that AGI could develop and entirely to new knowledge. And then, yeah, you would have to kind of like build the scaffolding from the concepts that are in your brain to the concept that you're trying to transmit from the AGI. And maybe the AGI is the one that knows how to build that scaffolding because it's so much smarter than raw humans. So I think the landscape of knowledge, if we develop AGI, and AGI can actually accelerate beyond, or not just beyond, but in different directions than natural human intelligence, I think that the landscape of knowledge could expand significantly. Yeah, I see no reason why that wouldn't be the case.
You have predictions in that regard? When could we
No,
expect AGI? When could we expect BCI? I mean, we would need to define both, right?
I'm probably more pessimistic than most. I don't see any reason in principle why things are impossible. That could be because I am just not educated enough on the topic. But just because something is in principle not impossible doesn't mean that there's any guarantee that we will find a path towards it. So I have no idea. I have no idea.
Kernel, what's your role there? What do you do on a daily basis? And why did you accepted to take that job?
Yeah. Well, I first found out about Kernel probably from their founding press release, back when they were actually planning on doing invasive BCI. And one of the reasons that it was always very clear to me, or they were always very clear about their intentions to, help humans in some way. Like, that was the goal. It wasn't just, hey, this technology is cool and we're going to make money. It was like, we're going to address problem X, and problem X was always very appealing to me. I probably applied 3 or 4 times before I convinced them to finally hire me. I'm essentially, if you know the space, you could call me an MLOps engineer. But essentially, I'm a software engineer that helps data scientists by developing or implementing tools that help them do their work, help them do their work more reproducibly, in a trustworthy way, faster, better, higher quality, better tested, that kind of stuff. So I help accelerate the scientists and the data scientists in the analysis pipelines that they need to extract insights from the data.
With machine learning?
Machine learning is something that has it depends on how you define machine learning. There's a lot of the sciences, and especially neuroscience. There's a lot of skepticism about complex machine learning models for good reasons. because we still don't really understand the brain that well, like no one does. And so building complex models on top of data of a thing that we don't really understand it's hard to tell convincing scientific stories about that. You know, a scientist wants to be able to say, I did intervention X and I saw predicted response in region Y and it produced behavior Z. And I could do this reliably across, 1,000 people. So therefore, I understand something about the brain. And it's hard to tell a straightforward story like that when the story is instead complicated model X gave me prediction Y about participant A, and I can't really tell you why, but hey, it worked. It's a different model. So there's kind of some skepticism there in terms of what the neuroscience community wants out of machine learning. But we are also, Kernel is also, there are opportunities because of the nature of our technology. There are some very interesting opportunities for us to do our own neuroscience, and we're not afraid of using complex machine learning. So
What hypothesis would you put forward to solve that complex problem?
well, I don't think it's one problem. Like the brain and body is a very complex system that does a lot of things. And so I think you have to have a very well formulated question, like, how might one alleviate feelings of anhedonia amongst people with certain subtypes of depression? Like you have to be very specific in the question you want to ask. And then you can start collecting data that might address that question and start building useful interventions on top of that. But it's like there is no one question. It's like, how does the brain work? That's not a well formulated question.
With what question would you start? Which one would be the priority?
Well, I'm personally motivated by stories of my family and other people that I've known throughout my life that have suffered in particular from disorders of mood and disorders of psychosis, and those are the ones that are particularly motivational to me. So, like I said at the beginning, I'm really interested in how we can improve everyone's mental wellness by developing technology that cultivates mindfulness. Because I think this is one of the most the adjacent possible. Yeah, that's the phrase. It's there. It's within our grasp, within our current technological capabilities. Many people are exploring different ways of doing it, and it's so that's what is especially interesting to me. But I can't say that that's any higher priority than Parkinson's or Alzheimer's or like anything else that's has a neurological basis. So that's just what's motivating to me.
Yeah, and what about the industry is a question I had, but like what do they think would be the best pathway there if the goal is to build this device that could optimize brain? And just before I go to that segment, is mental disease or physical ills in your brain the Trojan horse pathway to get the FDA approval and then go with the optimization route? Is that the plan?
Plan for whom?
For Kernel, for Neuralink, both are going after, for example, restoring blindness, or getting back the control of this limb by plugging something in your brain. Both companies are going for physical or mental heals. And I think they do that to get the approval of the FDA, right? Which is the step one, so that they can go the optimization route. Just like the same with my nootropic company, we developed a natural supplement at first to prove our concept, to get approved and all of that. And well, that was to get the approval, and after that we would go into straight up pharma and chemical components to scale and do things more efficiently. Two kind of Trojan horse regulations out there, which is, to be fair, like too restrictive in my opinion.
I would actually say that the most common approach is the opposite, is to go non-FDA regulated consumer device, collect lots of data, and then try to do something important on top of that. Like if you see what Apple has done with the Apple Watch, they put a watch on everyone's wrist, and then they're like, okay, now we can do EKG, right? And we can get FDA approval for Parkinson's, the symptom detection, and we like. So I think it's FDA approval is freaking hard. Like that's not easy. So that doesn't seem to me in any way to be the Trojan horse approach. That is the very much the thing we're doing. We have no other way of doing other than to get FDA approval. So we have to do it.
And FDA, it's because it is invasive. If it's non-invasive, then you don't need the FDA approval, right?
Well, I'm not an FDA expert. I'm not a legal expert on these things, but it has a lot to do with just how you phrase whether your device or whatever can give meaningful benefits. Like there's very technical definitions. And I think there's a lot of parallels there with like the supplement industry, and you don't have to get FDA approval if you say certain things, but if you say other things, then you do. So again, not a legal expert on that topic, but definitely anything that requires an invasive intervention, which Kernel is not. By the way, the Kernel Flow is a non-invasive device, but anything that would require FDA.
Yeah, so let's ask it that way. FDA apart, like, is the focus right now fixing illness, curing, rather than preventing / optimizing?
For whom? For Kernel?
Yeah, and you can also talk about Neuralink, your main competitor, quote unquote, if you are knowledgeable about them.
Okay. I actually need to use the restroom again, and then I can come back and answer that question.
Bio break number 2.
Bio break number 2.
Yeah, sure.